What's up, everybody? This is Mike Manzu with another Manzu Faust Productions video. And I am here today to start yet another reoccurring series on this channel. And I've been wanting to do this for a while. This is one of the first big ideas I had for a reoccurring series on this channel. And it is going to be called Sample This. And in this series, I will be focusing on compilations, usually from different parts of the world, covering different scenes, and how these samplers and compilations came to really form these scenes, and the act of buying these compilations and hearing this stuff for the first time, and then going out and trying to find everything you hear on these compilations, and the greatness that comes from these. And I'm kind of focused on punk. I wanted to pull Nuggets, but I forgot to at the last second. But wanted to say that one of the first really big, important compilations I can think of for punk and metal and all this kind of stuff does kind of go back to Nuggets. It's a very important, formative compilation in the annals of rock and roll and everything, and it focuses a lot on the early 60s kind of garage rock scene. A lot of these bands that were inspired by a lot of the stuff coming out of the British invasion at the time, just kind of doing more of an Americanized version of it, a little bit more of a pop sensibility and more than, the straight up blues sensibility that a lot of those bands were going off of. That was put out by Lenny Kaye. Yeah, Lenny Kaye from Patti Smith Group. And if you need a very early important compilation, go with Nuggets, man. It's a classic. But I got a big pile of a bunch of other stuff that I want to talk about through different scenes, and there's not going to be a kind of uniformity to this. It's not like a top 10 or anything like that. There's no real order. Kind of goes by different genres and different focuses and stuff, but it's going to go back and forth quite a bit. I wanted to start with one that is more of a really, it's more of a soundtrack to a documentary, but this is one of my favorites. That is Urgh Music War, and you got so many great early 80s new wave era style bands. Nice insert with information on the albums. So yeah, this is a great one for, if you're not as familiar with a lot of the post-punk, new wave kind of stuff coming out of the early 80s, you got a lot of great stuff like Gary Newman, Oingo Boingo, The Cramps, Fleshtones 999, The Go-Go's, The Police, XTC, Echo and the Bunnymen, X, Devo, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, Gang of Four, Perubu. You just got a solid amount of songs on this. A great documentary too. I don't think it's very widely available, but if you can find it, very cool to see a lot of these early kind of formative post-punk and punk groups and new wave groups, doing some extremely influential and awe-inspiring performances. You got Joan Jett, Klaus Nomi, the Au Pairs. Goes all over the place. And on the other side of the coin, we got No New York, which focuses on the late 70s, early 80s no wave scene coming out of New York City at the time. I believe this was put out by Brian Eno, yeah. And this has DNA, it has Mars, The Contortions, and Teenage Jesus and the Jerks. So this has multiple songs by each of these bands. I believe it's four each. and really does paint a great picture of a lot of these early bands. The Contortions is more of like a funk-inspired kind of like a little bit of like free jazz thrown in there and stuff. Obviously, James Chance on sax and vocals is a great giant like vocal performance from him. Teenage Jesus is famous for featuring Lydia Lunch, who would go off and have her own crazy career of stuff. Mars is some really heavy, like noisy kind of stuff, real off the wall. Probably the weirdest stuff on this album, if you have to ask me. And DNA is some real crazy, like kind of synth-driven type of stuff. A lot in common with the early Suicide material. And yeah, if you want to hear a lot of really cool early no wave and kind of like experimental punk rock, No New York, you cannot go wrong. Up next, big thing in like the early 80s was also UK 82, which took a lot of the kind of artsy punk and just kind of got rid of it pretty much, and more went towards what was happening in like the streets and stuff like the Exploited was coming more out of like an oi and somewhat heavy metal kind of aspect of that early punk rock. So they took 77, stuff like the Clash and the Sex Pistols and the Damned, and really distilled it down to its most like street level, aggressive, like bombastic version of it. And you had a lot of these great labels, Riot City, you had No Future, you had Gem, I think, put out a couple of them, Secret, which put out a lot of the early Exploited stuff. And speaking of No Future, this is Angels with Dirty Faces. This is kind of singles compilation of all the big stuff on No Future in, I believe this is like 81. You got 81, 82 era. You got Blitz, The Partisans, Red Alert, Peter and the Test Tube Babies, The Blood, The Insane from Germany, who was extremely great, underrated band, Blitzkrieg, The Samples, Attack, just solid. The Violators track is actually really good on this too. Solid compilation of different singles and stuff, and great little intro to some of the more earlier kind of UK 82 stuff before it turned more into like the Abrasive Wheels and the Actives and Exploited, you know, more in like line with stuff like UK Subs, Vice Squad, sort of the earlier formation bands. This is one I wish I showed off in my New York Hardcore retrospective video, but this is one of the best, like, you know, those, like, there's a ton of these. There's, like, you know, Together, there's New Breed, a lot of these great classic, I think New York Trash is another really good one. But yeah, so you got New York Hardcore, Where the Wild Things Are, put out originally by Blackout Records. This is put out by Noiseville. Great picture of Paul Bearer of Sheer Terror fame passed out on the floor. Got some cool little artwork for each of the bands. And yeah, I mean, this is solid. You got Outburst, Life's Blood, Breakdown, Uppercut, Sheer Terror, Maximum Penalty, Gorilla Biscuits, just like all the great bands that were putting out stuff on Blackout Records and this late 80s sort of like going more into like crossover and youth crew style kind of stuff. by this time, and just all these bands are solid, and all these bands have great material, and this is a great way to like introduce yourself to all these awesome bands. You also got Raw Deal, which is an early version of Killing Time, doing an earlier version of Brightside and Backtrack. And if you love Killing Time, you want to hear more like demo versions of those songs, definitely got to go with that. And my repress comes on this awesome blue vinyl. So, yeah, definitely like a must-have for New York hardcore aficionados. And, you know, hardcore aficionados in general. So, I want to move more towards Europe right now, and I'm going to start with Finland. Now, Finland has a shit ton of great comps. They were almost like Japan back in the day, where like all these different areas and regions in Japan would have their own dedicated compilations showing off like a lot of bands that didn't put out a lot of material, but you could find some great stuff on these compilations. Finland was a little bit different in that a lot of these compilations came out through the label Propaganda, and these are some extremely influential compilations, usually attached to some kind of zine. You also got a great one called Killed by Finnish Hardcore, which is a lot more of like an all-encompassing kind of deal. You got Hardcore 83, which has a very specific kind of hardcore vibe to it. You also got Yalta High Life. Later on, you have Propaganda as Hippies, which is a lot of that early 90s, more noisier, chaotic kind of stuff. And probably one of the biggest and most important compilations is Propaganda Russia Bombs Finland. Originally put out by Propaganda Records. This is a repress by Hane. And you got a bunch of classic stuff. You got the Bastards material off of their Haha demo stuff. You got Chaos, NATO, Tavi Cadet, Reese T, 013, Appendix, and this band. You got a lot of like more obscure kind of stuff that isn't as well known, like Dachau, Secunda, and Antakeo. And Antakeo is actually really cool. They got more of like that sort of Radissy, more upbeat kind of 77 kind of feel. They kind of align with Appendix and 013 very well. And yeah, this stuff is incredible. And if you really want to get into Finnish hardcore, this is definitely the place to go. One I don't own that I just wanted to talk about for a minute is a Japanese compilation known as Farewell to Arms, which is really big for me personally in getting into a lot of this stuff. It has a really good couple of Gastonk songs. You got some Lip Cream. You got some solid Gauze material on it. If you can hunt down like an early copy of that, definitely find it, because it's got some rippers. It's a great introduction to Japanese hardcore, again, in many different forms. You got a lot of different takes going on that record. Oh, shit. So, yeah. This one is more, so going back to Europe, and this one's a lot of like different places. You got stuff from Poland, you got stuff from Spain, Russia, Latvia, France, Yugoslavia, Switzerland, Belgium, Holland. A lot of these places were putting out amazing hardcore throughout the 90s. Lots of different scenes, lots of different sounds happening, and this is a great representation. Released a lot later. I think this was probably the early 90s, put out by 6 Weeks, and this is Europe in Decline. You got a huge list of bands. Show you the insert. Some great little flyer. I love when they do like the flyer work within these. And this is just some cool stuff all over the place. You got some more ragey D-beat kind of stuff. You got some of that crusty hardcore of the early 90s and power violence influence kind of stuff. And it really does like paint a picture of how much was going on in the different countries of Europe and all these more like, you know, if you're looking at this and you're seeing Slovenia and Denmark and Latvia, Yugoslavia, you don't think of these countries as having like gigantic, Czech Republic, you don't think of these countries as having gigantic influential scenes, but they really do, and they're all worth diving deep into. Belgium, Poland, Russia even, like a lot of these scenes are very represented, and it's cool to have a compilation like this to just kind of give you like a taste and see what you're into and go out and find the bands that and regions that you really think are the shit. Probably could have worded that better. Up next, we're getting into my kind of time period when I was really getting into a lot of the stuff of modern hardcore coming off of Bridge 9 and various other labels. This is put out by Revelation, and this is Generations, a hardcore compilation. And this is great. This is some of that early 2000s classic stuff. You got Go It Alone, Lions of Judah, Blacklisted, Iron Boots, Snake Eyes, Eternal Affairs, Sinking Ships, Righteous Jams, Cold World, Mind Eraser, Fucked Up, and Mental, among others. Down to Nothing, you got Keep It Up, some band called Robot Whales that I'm not as familiar with, but yeah, this is some great, like, early 2000s when, like, Youth Crew and that whole, like, revival was happening. This is, like, the best of the best bands to do it. Go It Alone has a very straightforward kind of Youth Hit Today worship sound. Blacklisted has, like, a lot of great, like, riffy kind of breakdowns to it. Iron Boots, I believe, has more of that, like, kind of skinhead-oriented early 80s, like, agnostic front and negative approach kind of feel to it. Cold World, you have more of, like, a hip-hop vibe going on. Mind Eraser is some furious power violence influenced stuff. Fucked Up out of Canada. Obviously, you got, like, a lot of that early Fucked Up stuff. Does have a lot more of, like, a Poison Idea kind of, like, aesthetic to it. But later on, they would go into, like, a lot of forms of indie and weird experimental kind of stuff. And this is just, like, a classic who's who of hardcore at that time. And I got an early press on this cool baby blue, sky blue vinyl. Great stuff on that. Next up, going into the more power violence field, and there's like two of these. This is a later one. This one's not as heralded, I guess. I don't have the original, but this is Possessed to Skate, Volume 2. You got 4 bands again, and this really stands out for the Scholastic Death material, which is Max Ward on vocals, who was the drummer in Spaz, and Plutocracy. And I even like ETA and Breakfast on this a lot. Breakfast, I believe, is from Japan. That would make sense, given their kind of goofy name. You got this nice little zine with art, some lyrics. Good 10-inch, just giving you a little overview of that. The first one I think is a lot better. Again, I never picked it up for whatever reason. That one has, I believe, Spaz and Charles Bronson on it, and that is definitely worth getting. Later, Japanese compilation, this time on 6 weeks. I don't remember what this escape was. So 6 weeks did that Europe in Decline. This is a 9-inch, I believe. 6 weeks Omnibus, a Japanese hardcore compilation. And this has so much shit. You got Zowl, Rose Rose, The Gaia, Beyond Description, Senseless Apocalypse, Toast, a few others, Slight Flappers. And this is some cool stuff all over the place once again. Got the cool artwork. And this is just like some great like later era, more into like the late 90s. A little bit of like power violence kind of stuff on here. You got Slight Flappers, Senseless Apocalypse. Then with like the more thrashier stuff, you got Rose Rose. You got Toast. Beyond Descriptions, more of that like D-beat influence kind of stuff. Really great comp. A lot of different sounds. This one, again, it's a sequel, but I really do like this one. I believe it's a double vinyl. Yep. So you would have these compilations of like the power violence revival kind of stuff. So this is getting into like the early 2000s, maybe mid to late 2000s. A lot of these bands were getting influence from like Charles Bronson and Despise You and Spaz and Man is the Bastard, Charles Bronson, all these like extremely important power violence bands in the early 90s, and kind of putting like a modern spin on it. And you got a hell of a lot of material on here. This comp kills. Fascists Volume 2. Great artwork. I love this like mashed together kind of collage style stuff they're doing. Again, great artwork, lyrics, and info on all of the bands. And this thing is utterly stacked. You got Lack of Interest, Noisier, Hummingbird of Death, Apartment 213, Septic Surge, Marion Barry, Despise You, Triac, Extortion from Australia, one of like the best Australian hardcore bands, Strong Intention, Vorsek. Yeah, just amazing stuff. And you know, this is put out by Deep Six and Relapse Records. So you got some big names behind that. And at the time, Relapse was really getting in on a lot of that stuff. They were kind of doing what the car company Scion was doing at the time, which made little sense to me. And a lot of that stuff is pretty solid, and you know, it definitely put Relapse back on the map in that late 2000s era. And it also, like, you know, fucking Relapse is doing great now with all their great like reissues and some of the modern bands they have coming out. I want to end this on I guess this is like 12 years old or something, but I love this comp, and it has a fair amount of great modern mincecore kind of stuff, so very influenced by Agathocles and Unholy Grave. You got Mustache Mincers, put out by Third Eye Grind, and this is a great compilation, 10-inch. You got a lot of classics on here, Misanthropic Noise, my boys, always gotta represent that band. You got an Urgh track, Cogs and Sprockets, Total Hipster Crusher, Self-Made God, Pizza High Five, Faction Disaster, Power Cup, Lieutenant Dan, Maximum Thrash, Fascists, great stuff. Got more of that cool artwork. You got all the different logos at the bottom. Yeah, just, you can find this pretty cheap still, I believe. Probably like $2 if you find it anywhere. Got this cool purple marble. Very nice color. And yeah, you got a lot of cool stuff. You know, if you're into stuff like Agathocles or Urgh and those like kind of big bands, and you're not as familiar with Faction Disaster or Misanthropic Noise, Fascists, and any of these kind of bands, like this is that's definitely one you want to check out. Mustache Mincers, good fucking shit. And that'll do it for this one. I'm probably going to do a sequel to this because there's a couple that I did not include that I wanted to also highlight. Just kind of slipped my mind at the last minute. And this video has gone on pretty long, as is. So yeah, I might have another video coming out tomorrow or Wednesday talking about a show from this past weekend that I was really excited to have gone to. And I got some fun stories and recollections on that, and that'll about do it. If you want to find me on social media, I am the Hordes of Manzerfaust on Instagram. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and that'll about do it. This is Mike Manzer with another Manzerfaust Productions video. Stay fucking metal.